decades. The purpose of today's hearing is to ask and discuss what are we doing with the Arctic and what do we want to do with the Arctic. Scientific programs and research into topics such as ocean acidification and science of the ice flows help us to understand the Arctic environment, but to what end? Is our government working with private industry and our allies, such as Canada, to build the infrastructure which enables strategic economic development, mineral, oil, natural gas extraction, as well as the possibility of commercial fishing? Or, as I fear, is this administration so focused on global warming that we are passing up ways of expanding prosperity and the well-being of these emerging opportunities in the Arctic? Let me note that while sometimes the rhetoric associated with the so-called race for the Arctic can be a bit exaggerated, the Arctic is not immune from the same forces of geopolitics which apply to other areas of the globe. One disturbing element, at least to me, of the Arctic discussion is the Cold War analogy that everything Russia is doing in the Arctic is a national security threat. We should not be finding ways, we should be focusing on finding ways to cooperate in mutually beneficial development with Russia rather than approach the Arctic issues with hostility and belligerence. Admiral Papp, during your testimony in December, you laid out a vision for the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. I look forward to hearing about the progress we've made and how those concepts have been put into action. Admiral, and I will pronounce it, Galuet. Okay. And Michael, the subcommittee, we all in the subcommittee look forward to learning about how the Coast Guard and Navy are preparing to carry out their missions in the Arctic and where those lines of authority rest at this moment. It would be especially useful to hear about how our country is working with our allies and Arctic partners to leverage and to build on the experiences that we have so far in order to have some real progress that we can demonstrate in the years ahead. Additionally, is the current division of labor between the Coast Guard and the Navy the best way to carry out our Arctic strategy? Or might some realignment allow our government to be more effective? Be interested to hear your opinions on that. I hope that our hearing today will help illuminate answers to these and other questions. So I thank you all for appearing today, and without objection, all members will have at least 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions or extraneous materials for the record. And with that, Mr. Meeks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Robacha, and it's great to be with Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member Sires, holding this hearing, and thank everybody for holding this hearing to provide us with an opportunity to examine our policy toward the Arctic and the opportunities within the region. At the 6-month mark of the American chairmanship, we can now honestly assess the progress thus far and the challenges that lie ahead. The Arctic has become a popular topic recently. It is the new geopolitically relevant region where energy, trade, military, and environmental interests intersect and perhaps clash. I am specifically concerned about our economic interests in the region given the changing landscape. And when I say changing landscape, I mean it literally. I'm referring to the melting ice caps and the subsequent new trade routes, reachable resources, and uncharted territory. Recently, we saw, for example, where the Shell abandoned its Arctic drilling plans due to low energy prices, regulatory pressure, and a misunderstanding of the geology. There are other private actors that are considering business and trade in the region as well. In America's role as chairman of the Arctic Council, what drives the economic opportunities in the region, and are we taking the environmental impact of economics into account? We need to look at all of those things. Furthermore, from a geopolitical perspective, one can sense that a number of nations are scrambling to be the first mover in the territory. Russia, for example, is ahead of everyone in the ice-breaking capabilities. This has both economic and military implications. And I would like to encourage cooperation between all of the actors and acknowledge the Arctic Council for being an instrumental organization in the effort to bring all concerned nations together, including China, because it is important for every nation that we have a clear understanding, because it affects all of us that share this place that we call the planet Earth. You know, on one of my first trips that I was able to take as a member of Congress back in 1999, I had always dreamed of going to Alaska. And I saw a trip, and I went to Alaska. And if the truth be told, I did not know what I was in for. I thought that the trip to Alaska was going to take me someplace where I'd have a nice hotel room and I'd get to see, you know, some of the ice and by air and get back home. I didn't realize that it was a camping trip. Even though I had camping gear, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that they were going to take me on a small plane, and I would fly over, and I would see the glaciers and everything and caribou that were moving, and didn't realize that in polar bears and grizzly. So I didn't realize that. And I didn't realize this little plane would land in the middle of the tundra, and they would tell this guy from New York City who had never gone camping in his life that plane would take off, and they would tell me, we will see you in 4 days. And so now I'm stuck out on this place 4 days, and it was fortunately, in one extent, that it was unusually warm at the time. But what I did not realize, with that warmth came trillions of mosquitoes. And so I thank God, though, for the 24-hour sun. So it never got dark. And I had to eat some of those mosquitoes as we tried to, because that was the only thing. But I saw the beautiful landscape. I saw, even though it was unusually warm, the rivers full of salmon swimming, and some of it still iced. I saw and had and tasted some of the greatest tasting water I've ever tasted as it came down off the mountain. I can still taste it as I sit here. I saw golden eagles flying and hawks with the nest with their babies. I saw nature as I had never seen it before. Even though while I was there, I was praying, saying, God, just get me home, and I promise you I won't do this again. But when I got home, I saw the magnificence of this great place that we call Alaska, and the significance it has to us as mankind, as humankind, no matter where we are or where we come from on this planet. So the interest that we have in it, I believe, has something to do with the essence of who we are as human beings. And by every nation being a part of this, and while we are chairing it, it is tremendously important to know the outcome of what we can do so that for the common good of all of us. If there's anything that we should unite on, is that we are protecting and making sure this place that we call home, Earth, is taken care of, and we weigh and utilize the economic opportunities with the environmental concerns and the benefit for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Well, I would have to say that's very inspiring. And, let me just announce, I will be giving the hammer here to, or the gavel, I should say, to Mr. Duncan, who is, of course, the chairman of the subcommittee overseeing the Western Hemisphere. And I will be gone for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I will return. And Mr. Duncan, you may proceed in charge. You got to win the election first.
Okay, so I'm just going to stay here while the chairman's gone. Let me just start by saying, when I came to Congress, I too wanted to go to New York City. And while I was in New York City, it was a different environment than South Carolina. Makes you funny. I'm glad you had a good experience up in Alaska. Beautiful part of the world, as Chairman Young will say.
Chairman Young sitting there.
But today we meet to examine the enormous potential of the Arctic, a region that's too often overlooked and misunderstood. Lands and ocean above the Arctic Circle are home to oil, minerals, and other natural resources. These resources also represent economic opportunity in the form of investment and job creation. Beyond these considerations, there are also major security components to the Arctic puzzle. All of these issues must be addressed during our nation's tenure at the helm of the Arctic Council, as it provides an excellent platform for the advancement of U.S. interest. The energy opportunity in the U.S. Arctic territory is vast. There's an area offshore of Alaska totaling about 1 billion acres. Reportedly, 6,000 miles of coastline has a potential for energy development. Moreover, a change in the patterns of sea ice will mean that there will be more time to explore for oil and gas each year. It also indicates that the time frame for offshore drilling and activity will remain open longer. A 2008 geological survey appraisal of undiscovered oil and gas resources state that the extensive Arctic continental shelves may constitute geographically largest unexplored area for petroleum on the Earth. Further studies propose that 30% of the planet's undiscovered natural gas and possibly 13% of undiscovered oil are in the region. Developing these energy stores and other mineral resources in the North will also generate economic progress in the form of investment and jobs. Currently, there's an absence of adequate infrastructure for proper development. Many of the natural resources are far from existing storage facilities, pipelines, and shipping lanes, so construction of better infrastructure will represent yet another economic opportunity. In terms of security, the Arctic presents a unique set of challenges. Traditional concerns exist, such as the ability to monitor geopolitical rivals operating in the same area. Both Russia and China are active in the north, and an increased U.S. presence is necessary to demonstrate that we're not falling behind. Russia has shown a commitment to establishing a strong presence in the far north, beginning construction on bases on Alexandra and Kolteni Islands. Though these installations are mostly suited for limited operational capacity and surveillance, the intention is very clear: to project power and stake claims in the Arctic. However, security is far more complex than merely positioning assets. The Arctic is home to some of the harshest conditions on the planet, with strong storms and deadly cold temperatures. As tourism in the region expands, so too must military cooperation and preparation. Joint exercises with our Arctic Council allies would help countries prepare for any disasters that might befall travelers or workers in the north. Search and rescue, coordination, and disaster relief exercises will be important initiatives as more people begin to flow into the region, and energy activities would certainly expand. In the near future, cruises will explore the northern coastline of Alaska and Canada, and it's imperative that both the U.S. and Canada are prepared to navigate the harsh landscape in an event of an emergency. I think we can learn a lot from our allies, Canada, and other Slavic nations that participate already in those search and rescue operations. In addition to these concerns, it will be crucial to respect the rights of these American citizens already occupying the land in the Arctic. I'm sure Mr. Young will talk about some of those. Each Arctic nation has citizens that already inhabit Arctic territory, and it's in the U.S. national interest that American citizens and these other citizens join in the development through job creation and economic opportunity. It's crystal clear that the Arctic is not a one-dimensional area. There are economic, energy, security, infrastructure, and human rights concerns in the region, yet the Obama administration is focused on climate change at the expense of these other important U.S. interests. Indeed, the U.S. Arctic Council chairmanship has become a platform for the extension of President Obama's climate change agenda, another page in the legacy that he's pursued without regard to proper constitutional checks and balances in a lot of ways. Additionally, the recent decision by the Obama administration to close the possibility of drilling in Alaska's Arctic Ocean over the next 2 years by terminating auctions for drilling rights is a disservice to our national interest. It would be a shame to let the pursuit of a more economically viable, energy-rich Arctic fall by the wayside for the U.S. at the expense of an aggressive climate change regime, all the while Russia and China stand poised to reap the benefits through their active engagement in the far north. In conclusion, the Arctic is of immense economic and strategic value for the U.S. national interest. We need to make sure that we're using the platform of the chairmanship of the Arctic Council and our own tools of power to advance U.S. national interest, support our allies and friends with similar interest in the common area. And with that, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today on how the State Department, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security are cooperating and coordinating to support our interest in the far north. And with that, I will turn to the ranking member, Mr. Series, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both, Chairman Rohrabacher and Duncan, for holding today's timely hearing on America's role as an Arctic nation. As a member of both the Western Hemisphere and Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats subcommittees, this topic is particularly important to me. Since Alaska's inclusion into the Union over 50 years ago, the United States has had a stake and interest in Arctic relations. Over the past decade, our interest has increased with receding ice caps and diminishing glaciers as a result of climate change. The changing geography of the Arctic places the United States in a unique position to work with other Arctic nations to ensure security of the region, including the people, wildlife, and resources. An increase in navigable waters opens the platform for new trade routes and economic benefits. Trade routes can be shortened by as much as 30%, saving money and avoiding pirate-infested waters. Even though these Arctic routes aren't safe at the moment, that time is approaching, and countries like Russia and China are greatly interested in increasing their footprint in the Arctic and securing these routes for themselves. The melting ice in the Arctic also poses security concerns we need to consider. Within the last few years, we have witnessed Russia's continued pattern of encroachment with Ukraine, Crimea, and Syria. Now Russia is racing to control the Arctic, operating over 30 icebreakers where the U.S. only has 2. We must remain vigilant to the growing aggression and ensure that it does not spread to the Arctic, running counter to U.S. interests. The administration's selection of Admiral Papp as the first U.S. Special Representative for the Arctic and the implementation of the National Strategic for the Arctic region are encouraging signs of increased engagement in the region. I look forward to hearing from Admiral Papp and other members of the panel on how Congress can best work with the administration to realize the goals and our plans for the High North. And I wanted to say that if you go to my friend Don Young's office, half of the wildlife in Alaska is hanging in his office. Beautiful office.
Meeks has flashbacks when he goes there. There's one member of Congress that has a territory, a district that actually touches the Arctic, so I'm going to use some leniency here and recognize the gentleman from Alaska for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important hearing. And I want to thank the people on the Arctic Council. I will tell you, Alaska sort of feels like the ugly debutante. No one paid any attention to the Arctic until recently. We kept saying, we're here, and there was little acknowledgement of, and now we have a great deal of interest. And I think it's our responsibility as a Congress, especially this committee, that we look at the total picture. I don't want us to become the spokeschild for the climate change battle. I want us to say, what can we do to adapt to it? How we can compete and work with the neighbors that are trying to grasp it right now. We talk about Russia as a security issue, but they really want to claim that area with China. And we sit on our hands. We have 2 worn-out icebreakers, which I funded for 40 years ago. We need new icebreakers. We need new docks. We don't have any docks. And there's been a lack, and this is where this council, this Arctic Council, and this group here has to recognize the economic side of it, not just the environmental side of it. This Congress has to recognize we have to put an infrastructure in place. Where will we build our docks? Will we be able to service the navigational needs? What role will the Navy play? What role does the Coast Guard play? What role does the Corps of Engineers? There has to be an Arctic policy. It can be established through this group right here. But you better work together. And if all I hear about, we're not going to listen to the local people, which just recently occurred with this administration. We talk about the indigenous people. They're not being heard. They've been heard by the industry, but by not this administration. This is a big picture. I represent that whole state, every lick, and including the mosquitoes, Mr. Meeks. Did they give you a 410 with your survival gear? They did. Because 410 is to shoot the mosquitoes, by the way. So I want this hearing to bring out where are we going to be 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, 1 year next month. I don't hear a lot of talk. We have a tendency to do that and allow Russia and China to take over the Arctic. It's too important to this nation. And without Alaska, we wouldn't even have this hearing. People forget that. That's why we're an Arctic nation. But the potential of the Arctic nation, potential of the Arctic, not only the minerals, potential to improve the well-being of these people of the United States, has to be done with a concrete plan with everybody working together. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and other members are advised they can submit the opening statements for the record. We also have a lighting system for our panelists. You'll be given 5 minutes if you could stay as close to that as possible. Your biographies are already provided to the members, so we're not going to read those. And I will now recognize Admiral Papp for a 5-minute opening testimony. Admiral.
Well, thank you, Chairman Duncan, and I look forward to seeing Chairman Rohrabacher back here in a little bit. Ranking Member Meeks, Ranking Member Series, and welcome as well to Chairman Young, who has been such a great supporter to us for so long. And yes, sir, I've had the taxidermy lecture in the office in the past, and I agree with you, it's educational. I know it's perfunctory to say that we're delighted to be here. I am, in fact, delighted to be here because I was supposed to be in Belgium today speaking at an Arctic conference, and all things considered now, I think I'd rather be here, but also because we get a chance to talk about this program and give it broader exposure. So thank you for having me here. As the Special Representative for the Arctic, my broad charge is to lead the nation's international efforts to promote our priorities to advance U.S. policy in the Arctic region. I also represent the Department of State at the Arctic Executive Steering Committee that was a result of the President's Executive Order on an implementation of the Arctic Strategy. The State Department recognizes that significant changes in the Arctic are creating new challenges and opportunities for the United States and other Arctic nations. A rapidly warming Arctic offers new shipping routes, increased opportunities for trade and tourism, and the potential for resource exploitation. But it also threatens traditional ways of life and increases the risk of environmental disasters. Our Arctic engagement takes place primarily through the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is the preeminent forum for international diplomacy on Arctic matters. The United States assumed the chairmanship of the Arctic Council in April of this year. Our chairmanship theme, One Arctic, Shared Opportunities, Challenges, and Responsibilities, echoes the belief that all 8 Arctic states must work together to address the challenges of a changing Arctic, to embrace the opportunities it presents, and to face the responsibilities we all have as stewards of this vast region. We're already a quarter of the way through our U.S. chairmanship and have already convened 2 meetings of the senior Arctic officials and several meetings of the Council's various working groups, task forces, and expert groups. These groups are pursuing an ambitious work plan for the next 2 years under the themes that we've chosen to highlight during the U.S. chairmanship. The first, Arctic Ocean Safety, Security, and Stewardship. The second, improving economic and living conditions. And then third, addressing the impacts of climate change. We're off to what is perhaps the most aggressive start to an Arctic Council chairmanship. The April ministerial in Iqaluit, Canada was followed in rapid succession by a kickoff event at the State Department, and then the earliest convening ever of the senior Arctic officials in memory. We've already just recently conducted a second senior Arctic official meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, and initial meetings of all working groups. We've co-sponsored an Arctic Energy Summit in Fairbanks, Alaska, and hosted an Arctic search and rescue exercise with the United States Coast Guard and the Department of Defense. I believe our most significant accomplishment to date has been the Conference on Global Leadership in the Arctic, Cooperation, Innovation, Engagement, and Resilience, otherwise known by the acronym GLACIER, which took place in late August in Anchorage. While technically not an Arctic Council event, GLACIER served as a centerpiece of the mission of the U.S. chairmanship to broaden awareness of the Arctic both domestically and abroad. GLACIER featured keynote speeches from Secretary Kerry and President Obama and other senior U.S. officials. 21 countries participated in GLACIER, including 7 foreign ministers. The White House and Department of State are continuing to build upon the momentum created by GLACIER, fulfilling the obligations as set forth in the presidential commitments and strengthening relationships with Alaskans in our American Arctic. It's important to note that the United States and other Arctic states are pursuing our mutual interests in what is currently a safe and stable Arctic region, marked by international cooperation and governed by international law. We cannot ignore that our international efforts in the Arctic are taking place during a difficult time in our relationship with Russia. Russia's annexation of Crimea, its aggression in Ukraine, and its efforts to intimidate its neighbors are an affront to a rules-based international system and put at risk the peace that we and our allies have worked so hard to achieve in Europe. The international community's disagreements with Russia have complicated our efforts in the Arctic, but have not stalled them. It's not business as usual, but we've worked with Russia on Arctic issues during past political crises and are maintaining multilateral activities within the Arctic Council, such as those to protect the Arctic environment, ensure maritime safety, and promote scientific cooperation. The Arctic region has enormous and growing geostrategic, economic, environmental, and national security implications for the United States. We are at a pivotal point in history as the Arctic is rapidly changing, creating significant challenges and opportunities for every Arctic nation. The challenge of charting a course towards a sustainable future in the Arctic is important for all of us. The world looks to the United States for leadership, and as Chair of the Arctic Council, we have a unique opportunity to demonstrate our leadership as an Arctic nation. In this role, we look forward to advancing national priorities, pursuing responsible stewardship, and strengthening international cooperation in the Arctic. So I once again thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. The Chair will now recognize Vice Commandant Michel for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Meeks, Ranking Member Series, Representative Young, distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on Coast Guard operations in the Arctic, the Coast Guard's Arctic strategy, as well as our international and domestic efforts to ensure safe, secure, and environmentally responsible maritime activity in this region. Mr. Chairman, the Coast Guard and our predecessor agencies have been operating in the Arctic since 1867 when Alaska was purchased from Russia. For example, the revenue cutter Bear was essentially the sole face of Federal presence to many remote parts of the territory of Alaska for over 40 years. Then as now, our missions are to enforce U.S. laws and regulations, conduct search and rescue, assist scientific exploration, foster navigation safety and environmental stewardship, and provide assured access in preserving U.S. sovereignty. Unlike the days of the revenue cutter Bear, today we find significant growth in human activity because the region is more accessible. There is water where there used to be ice, and the Coast Guard must increasingly be present to exercise our authorities and protect the nation's maritime interests. I have spent a significant amount of my career focused on Arctic and polar issues and have traveled throughout the polar regions to better understand the challenges of operating in these extreme environments, the range of national and international issues, and the impacts of increasing human activity. I can personally attest that these regions are remote, hostile, and unforgiving. Distances are vast, weather is a constant factor, ice conditions are very dynamic, and infrastructure is almost non-existent. Operations in both polar regions demand detailed and deliberate planning, supported by specialized, reliable, and unique equipment, and they often demand close coordination with Federal, state, local, academic, industry, and indigenous community stakeholders. The polar regions also offer valuable opportunities for international cooperation and interoperability. The National Strategy for the Arctic Region and its implementation plan establish U.S. Arctic policy. The Coast Guard's supporting Arctic strategy includes 3 strategic objectives: improving awareness, modernizing governance, and broadening partnerships. These 3 objectives directly support national policies. With these objectives in mind, I would like to highlight 4 specific areas of emphasis. First, the Coast Guard conducts mobile and seasonal operations in the Arctic region as maritime activity and environmental conditions warrant. Highlights from this year's Arctic Shield deployment include establishing temporary forward operating locations along the North Slope. The national security cutter Weishi and high-endurance cutter Monroe operated in the Chukchi and Bering Seas, conducting maritime patrols and providing response and command and control capabilities during Shell's drilling operations. The medium icebreaker Healy conducted a perimeter circuit of the U.S. exclusive economic zone and a historic expedition to the North Pole. Second, in facilitating safe global shipping, the Coast Guard was instrumental in the development of the Polar Code, a suite of safety and environmental protection regulations adopted by the International Maritime Organization in 2015. These regulations will enter into force in 2017. Third, the Coast Guard continues to provide strong support to the Arctic Council and the U.S. chairmanship, including policy and programmatic support, as well as being a key sponsor of various contingency response agreements and exercises. Fourth, the Coast Guard is increasing engagement with peer maritime services from all Arctic nations, including Russia. 3 weeks ago, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum was formally established at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy with 8 Arctic nations, heads of Coast Guards or equivalents, and Secretary Johnson in attendance. Before closing, I want to emphasize the importance of assured access to the polar regions. The ability to operate year-round, safely and reliably means having heavy icebreakers. Year-round access is vital to our nation's security and economic interests. In August, at the Glacier Summit in Anchorage, Alaska, the President expressed clear intent to maintain our ability to access polar regions year-round, affirm the Coast Guard's responsibility to provide heavy icebreaking capability, and announce plans to accelerate the acquisition of new heavy icebreakers. Today, the Coast Guard operates 2 icebreakers in the polar regions, the heavy icebreaker Polar Star and the medium icebreaker Healy, which mainly provides scientific support to the National Science Foundation. Polar Star is over 40 years old, and our only other heavy icebreaker, Polar Sea, is currently inoperable. The Coast Guard needs at least 2 heavy icebreakers to provide year-round, assured access, and self-rescue ability in the polar regions. The Coast Guard is moving forward at best speed to meet the President's intent to recapitalize our aging heavy icebreaker fleet, and we look forward to working with Congress on this important effort. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and thank you for your support of our men and women in uniform. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commandant. Chair will now recognize Admiral Gallaudet.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rohrabacher, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Meeks, and Ranking Member Series, and other members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Navy's ongoing future activities in the Arctic. I have submitted my full statement to the committee, which I ask be made part of the hearing record. I will now give a brief opening statement. As a global force, the U.S. Navy must be ready to operate in all of the world's oceans, including the Arctic, as we have done for many decades. The risk of conflict in the Arctic region is currently low, and as such, the Navy's current posture in the region is appropriate to address existing defense requirements, primarily through the use of undersea and air assets. However, in the event that these requirements change, we must be ready to operate in this challenging and changing environment. In support of the U.S. National Strategy for the Arctic region and the Department of Defense Arctic Strategy, the Navy has identified 4 strategic objectives: ensure U.S. Arctic sovereignty, provide ready naval forces, preserve freedom of the seas, and promote partnerships. The recently revised Cooperative Strategy for 21st Century Sea Power builds on the heritage and complementary capabilities of the Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard team to advance the prosperity and guarantee the security of our nation. The sea services will continue to evaluate Arctic access and presence requirements, improve maritime domain awareness, and pursue cooperation with Arctic partners to enhance maritime safety and security of the region. The Arctic is a major driver of global climate and weather. This region is experiencing change at an accelerated rate compared to the rest of the world. The diminishing sea ice is gradually opening the region to the potential for increased economic activity and tourism, including commercial shipping, fishing, oil and mineral extraction, and tourism. These changes will necessitate more accurate and long-range forecasts to ensure safe transit in the region. The U.S. Navy Arctic Roadmap for 2014 to 2030, which aligns with the National Arctic Strategy, includes a plan that directs the development of Arctic capabilities and capacity in step with the changing environmental conditions. The Navy will continue to develop our strong cooperative partnership with the Coast Guard, in addition to other interagency and international Arctic region stakeholders, to address the emerging opportunities and challenges caused by the seasonal opening of the Arctic Ocean waters. The Navy will continue to take deliberate steps to develop Arctic expertise through exercises, scientific missions, and personnel exchanges that provide sailors with opportunities to learn best practices. The Navy will limit surface ship operations in periods of two periods of projected peak activity associated with open water conditions. Even during open water conditions, weather and ocean factors, including sea ice, must be considered when conducting operational risk assessments. The Navy will emphasize low-cost, long lead-time activities to match capability and capacity to future demands, and will continue to study and make informed decisions on operating requirements and procedures for personnel, ships, aircraft, with interagency partners and allies. Through ongoing exercises such as the Navy's biennial ICE exercise, or ICE-X, and the associated scientific ICE expeditions, as well as research and transits through the region by Navy submarines, aircraft, and surface vessels, the Navy will continue to learn more about the evolving operating environment. The Office of the Oceanographer of the Navy and the Office of Naval Research are leading efforts to better understand the complex polar environment and more accurately predict the operational environment in support of safe navigation, including research on sea ice dynamics, acoustic propagation, Arctic waves and swell, and ocean stratification. Our Marginal Ice Zone Research Initiative is an example of the types of programs designed to develop new observing technologies and gather observations using a mix of autonomous sensors and platforms, allowing Navy-funded scientists to investigate ice, ocean, atmosphere dynamics and characterize the physical processes that govern the seasonal evolution of ice cover. These observations are critical to enabling improvements in numerical predictions of the polar operational environment. Understanding the importance of partnerships in addressing common concerns, the Navy is partnering with the Defense Research and Development Canada on an acoustic propagation project to better understand surface losses due to interactions with ice cover, acoustic fluctuations, and ambient noise in open water during the summer in the marginal ice zone. The Navy will continue working to solve the difficult problems that arise from Arctic operations to ensure our force can operate safely in the Arctic when needed. The Navy will likely be called upon to support the U.S. Coast Guard and other government agencies by providing marine data collection, sea ice forecasting and predictions, and the forecasting of hazardous weather and ocean conditions. With the Coast Guard, through the implementation of the National Fleet Plan and our respective Arctic strategies, the Navy and Coast Guard are identifying opportunities to increase commonality and interoperability. While balancing all our global defense responsibilities, the Navy will continually assess its preparedness in response to changes in the Arctic environment and changes in the security environment. Maritime security and international naval collaboration have always been critical components of U.S. Arctic policy. The Navy's approach underscores the need to strengthen our cooperative partnership with interagency partners, especially the Coast Guard and the Arctic stakeholders. The key will be to balance potential investments with other service priorities and leverage interagency and international partnerships. By taking a proactive, flexible approach, the Navy can keep pace with the evolving Arctic region while continuing to safeguard our global national security interests. Again, thank you, Chairman Rohrabacher, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member Meeks, Ranking Member Series, and other members of the subcommittees for the opportunity to appear before you today. This concludes my statement, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists, and Chairman Rohrabacher will be back in just a minute, but so I'll go ahead and recognize myself for some questions. This is a question for all of you. Fascinated with technology and the ability for unmanned technology, drones or underwater vehicles, and is there a possibility to use those in the Arctic for exploration for whatever we're looking for, whether it's minerals or whether it's the determination of sea ice thickness? I'd love to hear your thoughts about using technology in that environment and some of the challenges that maybe that environment presents to the use of technology. So, Admiral?
Thank you, Congressman Duncan. Yes, sir, we have the Naval Oceanography Program has significant experience in concert with the Office of Naval Research in operating unmanned systems across the world to better characterize the ocean in support of our warfighting requirements. And we've conducted experiments and exercises in the Arctic region with autonomous systems and autonomous sensing systems, including unmanned underwater vehicles and drifting floats and profilers. And actually, we will demonstrate another example of these technologies during this ice exercise I alluded to in my opening statement. There are challenges in operating in this difficult environment due to the nature of sea ice and the hazardous conditions it imposes on sensors. But as we continue to practice and experiment, we're learning how to address those challenges. But in my opinion, if you look at the nature of and the need for unmanned systems to address the dull, dirty, and dangerous type of work they're best suited for, the Arctic is an environment perfectly suited for those kind of technologies.
So we're seeing this International Space Station and a lot of satellite data being used, looking at the Arctic for changes. Do you trust being able to measure sea ice thickness or temperature from space?
Yes, Congressman, we do actually. We're actively employing a Canadian synthetic aperture radar sensor on one of their satellites as part of the mission of our Naval and National Ice Center, which provides operational predictions of ice movement, sea ice movement for operating forces in the region. This is an international collaborative effort with the Coast Guard and our Canadian allies. And again, that center will be used in a prominent way for this ice exercise in March of 2016 to best locate the ice camp where our two submarines will surface and conduct the exercise.
Yeah. Is there any margin of error there? Have you noticed any differences between measurements taken from space and what you may find actually on the surface?
Yes, sir. There is a fair amount. There is uncertainty. I couldn't characterize the exact amount, and I'd like to take that for the record. But we have a strong confidence in our satellite sensing capabilities. But as in any region, the best use is sort of a suite of capabilities that include in situ sensors as well as remote sensors from satellite, for example, or radar. And those work in a complementary way to best characterize a given physical environment. So that applies in the Western Pacific as it does in the Arctic.
All right, thank you. I want to shift gears here, Admiral Papp. We see China's incursions into the South China Sea, specifically the Spratlys. These are atolls, underwater shallow reefs that have been built upon. So as they continue to violate what I think the international law in the South China Sea, has the administration considered moving to revoke some of the privileges we have granted China in the international community, such as their observer status in the Arctic Council?
Well, sir, part of the response has been in that particular area of the world, work between the State Department, the Department of Defense, freedom of navigation exercises demonstrating U.S. will and commitment to stand against those illegal proclamations of waters in the South China Sea. But it's isolated to that, much like we have isolated the sanctions on Russia in response to their incursions in Ukraine and Crimea, yet we're still able to work within the Arctic. We are hopeful that we can use the Arctic as a place where we can continue to have communications, primarily through the Arctic Council, where China is an observer state. So at this juncture, we are not under consideration or not considering revoking their status as an observer, but certainly that's one of the options we could look at in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Admiral Gallaudet, while the Arctic is a low-threat environment and likely will remain so, I think our Navy needs to be ready to serve anywhere, anytime. Does the Navy have the gear and infrastructure to operate in the high north if needed? Just help educate us and what some of the challenges and the type gear that you see the need for or are utilizing today.
Yes, Chairman Duncan. The short answer is yes for the current requirements. The combatant commanders that operate in the Arctic region, U.S. Northern Command and U.S. European Command and U.S. Pacific Command, they have not stated a requirement for continuous presence by Navy surface vessels. However, our submarine force is well equipped to operate in the region and has been doing so since 1958 with the first under ice deployment of the USS Nautilus. And in fact, this year, the USS Seawolf just returned from a very successful operational deployment across the Arctic. So the primary requirements we see today are through maritime domain awareness or Arctic domain awareness, and we have the aviation assets as well as remote sensing capabilities that can fill that mission, as well as the undersea requirements that our submarine force is well suited for. As I mentioned in my opening statement, our Arctic roadmap is designed to look at future requirements in concert with the demands that the combatant commanders may levy upon the U.S. Navy to ensure that we build that capability and capacity for increased surface presence or any other kind of operations.
Thank you. My time's expired. Except for Mr. Meeks, most of the equipment used may be foreign to most members of the committee, but apparently he was able to survive with that. So I'm going to turn to him for his line of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Duncan. Let me ask quickly first a few, I guess, environmental questions in that the U.S. Geological Survey reports that 50% of the U.S. coastline is at a high or very high risk of sea level rise impacts due to global warming-induced ice melting and threatening many of the 16.4 million Americans that live in the coastal floodplain. So my first question is, what are the options that are available or that's being drafted for those populations in case of imminent danger for their lives and their livelihood? Mr. Papp?
Well, Mr. Meeks, first and foremost, we already have people who are in danger. We have villages along the Alaska coastline, Shishmaref, Kivalina, and others that are literally falling into the sea now because they're not protected by the fast ice along the shore, permafrost melting, or permafrost thawing rather, and their villages being overrun sometimes by the waves, by the surf, by the storms. From all that I've seen, they probably will have to be relocated to higher ground, which is going to be tremendously expensive. that's not a State Department issue per se. It's not even an Arctic Council issue per se, but I know that discussions are going on. President Obama himself flew over Shishmaref during his 3 days in Alaska this August to be able to see firsthand, and he also landed and spoke to some of the Alaskan natives and residents in the area up there, and has a better appreciation for what's going on. And I know the interagency is looking at the potential for how do we pay for moving the villages or doing other remediation up there.
So, well, same thing, environmental concerns. You know, with these fisheries that I'm hearing about there, that the future of the Arctic and specifically of its ecosystem is of great concern, and I think that is of interest to anyone who's interested, as I talked about earlier, in our planet, regardless, I think, if you believe in climate change or not. The United States and 4 other nations that border the Arctic Ocean pledged to prohibit commercial fishing, for example, in the international waters of the Arctic until more scientific research could be done on how warming seas and melting ice are affecting fish stocks. So my question is, what are the gravest concerns of the administration regarding the Arctic's ecosystem, and are their effects reversible? And 2, how badly are the fish stocks damaged, and are other nations' fishing practices affecting the stock of fish regardless of the ban?
Well, sir, the declaration concerning the prevention of unregulated high seas fishing in the central Arctic Ocean was a great step forward. Ambassador David Balton, who is also sits as chair of the senior Arctic officials for us during our chairmanship, negotiated that with what we call the Arctic 5, as you recognized. And it was a good first step towards coming to some meaningful action in terms of, first and foremost, taking a pause, which we have done in U.S. waters, to develop the science to determine what is happening with migration of species up towards the Arctic. So we are at work with that. The other concern, though, is that there's a large portion of the central Arctic Ocean that is international waters. Other countries can use innocent passage, transit through our exclusive economic zones, and then fish in the Arctic in the foreseeable future when there is, at least during the summertime, no Arctic ice in the Arctic Ocean. So what we hope to do now is take the next step of bringing in those other countries, the major fishing countries like China, Korea, Japan, and others, and bring them in and start working towards an agreement as well on what the future is. And it's primarily focused on taking the time to gather the science. We have regional fisheries committees all around the country and in the world that look at fish stocks and regulate the species so that they'll be sustainable. We hope to be able to gather the science with this migration of species for the Arctic Ocean as well, and then in future years come to some regulated process for the fisheries.
Thank you. Really important in my estimation. And let me just check one other thing, and I guess I'll ask this to either to the Admiral or to the Vice Commandant. That is, the Arctic Council is an excellent area to promote cooperation. That's what I'm all about, between nations and Arctic territories. Nevertheless, there seems to be a push to militarize the region. So my question is, are we concerned over the military nature of the Arctic development? Do you think Mr. Papp is the best one to answer that question?
Well, it's definitely a concern, Mr. Meeks, and we spend an awful lot of time watching this. I go and get intelligence briefings within the State Department nearly weekly, and I've gone to other 3-letter agencies around the city as well to make sure that we are monitoring things properly. And what I see, and I think we're focused primarily on Russia, is a country that is concerned about the security of a developing waterway, that is reestablishing facilities, airfields and bases along a coastline which encompasses almost half the Arctic. And I don't see that as militarization. I think you can pick certain aspects of what they're doing and trumpet them as militarizing the Arctic. But I've had a chance to watch this, and what I think they're doing is, in most cases, some reasonable things in terms of being prepared for providing security along a sea route that is increasing in traffic right now. Some of the things the Russians are doing, I wish that we were doing along the north slope of Alaska right now in terms of preparing infrastructure for future human activity.
very much amount of time.
Yeah, I thank the ranking member. I now turn to the gentleman from Alaska for 5 minutes.
I thank the witnesses. I'd like to have each one of you, without talking to one another, give me a view of where Alaska is, where it should be, even regardless of the Admiral Papp's position. What do you see and how are you putting it together collectively? I'm not happy with the administration. I try to keep them getting involved politically, but when they shut down all the leases for 2 years without any consultation, lack of communication with the Corps of Engineers, where they were going to study for a port, they're not doing it. The private investment of the local communities was disregarded. And I want to know where is and who is going to be, should it be Congress setting up where Alaska is going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Because I see it, I read it, I see it, the constant harping on climate change. That doesn't change the fact if it is occurring and if man is doing it, how are you going to adapt to it? We're the only people I know of in this whole change is not trying to adapt. We're trying to keep things stable. I know the Admiral's thinking militarily. Coast Guard is thinking about icebreakers, which he's not going to get until he finally listens to me. Admiral Papp's got a position. I don't think there's any correlation with the local people, state of Alaska, or anything else. So I need a report from you where you think we're going to be, so we can make some decisions. Are we going to be an Arctic nation, or are we going to be still playing mumbly peg? Probably none of you ever played mumbly peg. It's with a knife, and I'm very good with that, by the way. And trying to see how close you come to your opponent's toe without hitting it. Not much agreement to one another. So I'm just saying I want to hear that later on. This is part of your role, because I can tell you, other than myself, and I have a sketchy view, no one really knows the Arctic. And if you don't help us get together where there's going to be a plan, then we're not going to be able to achieve it. We'll sit around and run around mulberry bush all the time. So that's your job, not just Admiral Papp's position. Where's the military going to be in this? Corps of Engineers automatically got out of a study for a port. We're going to need a port. Not that later on, but right now. Well, thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I'll turn the gavel back over to Mr.
And just
Rohrabacher.
you, Mr. Chairman, not because you're coming back, I'm just leaving. It's not because of you. Thanks.
Congressman Series.
Admiral Papp, you know, I was happy to hear that we are monitoring what's going on there in terms of the Russians. But can you tell me, they have 30 icebreakers. We have 2. That's a whole fleet to me. Why do they need 30 and we can only deal with 2? I mean, the Russians are not there to go fishing. Why do they need 30? Are they trying to establish, I guess, ownership by working in these different areas? And then when we raise our voice, they'll say, well, we have had 30 icebreakers there for years, and it was never an issue.
Well, yes, sir. I would have to say that the Russians are much more connected to their Arctic than the people of the United States are. Culturally, the Arctic is a part of Russia, and they have been involved there much longer, and they now have an opening sea route, which is directing their attention to it even more. And they have half the coastline in the Arctic. The Arctic, if you look at a polar projection down on the North Pole.
I'm looking at it right. Is that the same map you got up there?
It is. So the predominant feature, if you put approximately 66 north latitude, a circle on there, which I don't see on there, but encompassed by the Arctic Circle, it's mostly an ocean. So it's a maritime environment, and Russia has half the coastline around the Arctic Ocean. So it's understandable, when they have larger populations than us, that the waterway is open more than ours has been for centuries, that they're going to have more activity up there. So they are doing legitimate things that they should be doing as an Arctic nation and preparing for increased human activity. I don't begrudge them having the icebreakers. We should be doing the same thing. Our Arctic is opening up. There's much more human activity, and the United States Coast Guard needs to provide assured access for security issues, and the only way you can do that guaranteed year-round is by having icebreakers. So it is woeful that we've gotten to the point where we only have 2 icebreakers. During World War II, we built 8 icebreakers, and in fact, we're loaning icebreakers to the Russians until after World War II. So we've declined quite a bit, and we need to be about the business of correcting that.
Vice President.
Yeah, if I can add in here, I agree with everything Admiral Papp said. You know, the Russians understand that in order to have governance and in order to enforce sovereignty, you got to have presence. And if you're talking about ice-covered waters of this caliber, you need heavy icebreaking capability. When I came in the Coast Guard, we had 5 heavy icebreakers. When my Commandant came in the Coast Guard, we had 7 heavy icebreakers. We've allowed that to atrophy all the way down to 1 heavy icebreaker that is over 40 years old, that has been refurbed for another 5 to 8 years of use, and 1 medium icebreaker. It's a long history as to why we find ourselves where we do, but I can tell you as a Coast Guardsman, right now, I cannot guarantee the United States of America global, year-round access to all the ice-covered areas where we have sovereign interests, and that's where we are today, sir.
Would you like to add something? And then,
Well, yes, sir. What I would say, though, is finally, I used to be working with Admiral Michel, and I would say not only did I start my career in Alaska 40 years ago, but over the last decade, I spent a lot of time focused on the Arctic and trying to advance the issue of building icebreakers. You know, the President has committed now. He is committed to speeding up the construction of the first icebreaker, and he's now talking plural in terms of icebreakers. And I am assured that we are moving in that direction. But we got that commitment because we finally got him to Alaska. I mean, there's a lot of other issues that our President, our administration, our Congress is focused on. And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, it's only about climate change. Well, yes, that's a legacy issue for this President, and it's what brought him to Alaska. And I, for one, having a responsibility for Arctic activities, am glad that he came up there for any reason. I don't care what reason, but he finally got up there. And coming back from Alaska now, these are now top priorities for the administration. And I have been over to the White House, to the National Security Staff, and there are commitments now to start moving these things forward. So while it may not be moving fast enough for some people, I'm grateful that now we have progress on these issues.
I just find the disparity being so large. How can anybody be comfortable with security? Can you add a little what you were going to say before?
Yes, sir. I can give you the Navy and Department of Defense perspective on that. And with respect to Russia in general in the Arctic, we do have concerns. We're watching the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap very closely. But we also see that Russia has not made any attempts to violate our territorial seas. We've agreed since 1990 on the Bering Strait maritime boundary with Russia, and they're fully complying with that. And in addition, I must concur with Admiral Papp's comments. By personal observation, I was in St. Petersburg, Russia 2 weeks ago. The Russian Navy chaired the Arctic Region Hydrographic Commission, and this is under the International Hydrographic Organization, which governs all standards and cooperation for hydrographic activities and making seafloor maps. And the Russians were very, very open about their intentions in the Arctic. And it was exactly what Admiral Papp had said. They intend to develop it economically. Their security, their growth in their military is designed primarily for that, to provide the security for that economic growth of the Northern Sea Route. And we were quite amazed that they would be so forthright and open in sharing hydrographic data with us and encouraging cooperation. They basically view the Arctic as the one region the rest of the world might work with them on in view of their aggression in Crimea.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I will reserve the final area questions. I did watch some of your testimony from the side room before I had to go into that conference call. Mr. Yoho, would you like to move forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate you being here. I'm glad it's a bipartisan group that you let the Navy sit with you, too. And, you know, when I look at this, I want to ask this question, and I want this question directed at us because it obviously is, but I want to hear from you guys so that hopefully people will listen to this in their offices. How detrimental has it been for Congress's failure to complete our budget, get away from CRs on your planning, your procurement, and your mission in what you guys do? I mean, how detrimental has that been over the last, say, 5, 10 years? This is your chance, Admiral Papp.
Sir, as a former service chief who had to go through sequestration and all kinds of other activities, it almost doubles your workload because you have to plan, you have to take your already limited staff and plan for multiple contingencies. Whether it's a government shutdown, whether it's an inability to award a contract to build a ship, and then going through processes to begin an orderly shutdown of the government by issuing notices to all your civilian employees and others, and telling your military people that they still have to work but they may not get paid. I mean, it's just tremendously frustrating for people, particularly people in uniform, that are out there doing their job, and they understand they have to continue to do their job, and not seeing the most simplest aspect of a government, approving a budget, come through in a timely manner so that they can work more effectively and keep things going. We've had to cancel conferences. We've had Arctic Council meetings where we've had to cancel at the last minute because we approach 1 October and the budget hasn't been passed, and things like that. So, I mean, it's almost now contingency planning in everything that you do, because even though you know that, okay, they're going to come through with a continuing resolution at the last moment, you still got to go through the process of preparing for a shutdown or canceling conferences and other things. So it's just tremendously inefficient.
In your opinion, is this one of the things that have led down to the scale down of the amount of icebreakers that we have? Admiral or Commandant Michel?
I don't think that was the main issue on the icebreakers. Was sort of from another genesis. But I echo what Admiral Papp said. I mean, the lack of certainty that you have in buying capital assets doesn't help the process. Very detrimental to personnel, and I can tell you it degrades morale within the organization.
Absolutely.
People don't feel like they're valued and they're being sent home. We've had reductions in operating hours and a whole bunch of other things, sir, that impacts us. The only reason I say on the icebreakers is, we've had the recapitalization challenges are of a much broader nature, and they deal with sort of responsibilities within the executive branch on recapitalization of the icebreaking fleet, and it's at such kind of a nascent stage during these latest cycles of sequestration and so on and so forth that I don't think those have been the primary driver for why we are where we are with the heavy icebreaking capabilities.
All right, I appreciate that. And of course, obviously, one of the things it does is it winds up increasing the cost down the road, and we're trying to save money, but in the end result, we wind up costing us so much more money. So I just wanted to hear that because we knew that, but I want more people to hear that so that we get our act together up here. So I gave you some freedom there. Are you guys at the liberty to speak about the posturing of other countries, primarily Russia and or China, and what we can expect in the future up there? I mean, hopefully the goal is to keep it demilitarized, but as people get up there, territories and stakes get claimed. What are your thoughts on that? We'll start with you, Admiral.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Yoho. In regards to the posturing of Russia and China, I spoke previously about Russia and our opinion that their intention is primarily economic development, and we feel no threat in the Arctic by the Russians. However, or in addition, the Chinese and their work in the Arctic has been limited to either research with their icebreaker, the Snow Dragon, or just recently, you probably know that some of their surface ships conducted an innocent passage in our Arctic waters, but they announced it well in advance. They followed international law, and in fact, it made a very good case for us to point to what they're doing in the South China Sea and show that that was inconsistent, not following the rule of law.
Thank you.
Sir, we actually have pretty good working relationships with our counterparts in both China and Russia. So, for example, the Russians were just in New London, Connecticut, our Coast Guard Academy, to actually formally sign the agreement for their participation in the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. And that's going to be an operationally focused agency that will run exercises on topics like search and rescue or environmental protection reasons. And we actually have a quite good working relationship, daily working relationship with the Russian Border Guard, who is our counterpart, and we work on fisheries issues and search and rescue and a whole bunch of things. As far as China goes, Ours has all been cooperative with them as well, whether it's the Shuilong or whether it's the China Coast Guard, who participates in the North Pacific Coast Guard Forum, which deals with Bering Sea issues or high seas drift net enforcement and a whole range of different issues. So from a Coast Guard wheelhouse, our relationships are surprisingly good, and they're beneficial for both countries, and we try to work very hard at those, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, and my time's up. But I appreciate your service. I appreciate what you do. And I hope Russia and China and we all work together and keep it, on the table, above the table.
Thanks very much. We have about I got 6 minutes left, and let me just note that as we have heard through this questioning and your testimony, that budget issues more than weather issues are determining what policies we take that will deal with the Arctic. So with that said, and with that understanding that the budget challenges that we have, we are borrowing money. Talk about China's role. How about the fact that they buy our debt, and that one out of every $5 we spend is borrowed money? So with that said, we need to focus on the economic element of the plan. And let me suggest that perhaps whatever cost is needed to maximize the benefit the American people and the people of the world will have from the Arctic has to be not just a signing of checks by the Federal Government and passing them on, but instead perhaps different ways of approaching a very costly program and project, which is utilizing the Arctic for its best uses to benefit mankind and benefit the United States. Contracting out rather than buying icebreakers. We hear that icebreakers are the ultimate, right now, capital asset that's necessary to ensure that we get the value out of the Arctic. There's no reason to have to buy them, is there? I mean, SpaceX, I think, has actually gone into, how about private sector, public sector partnerships? How about buying a cheaper or buying the same ship from Finnish shipyards? These are all things that could impact on the economic decision as to what we should move forward with. And I'm sure that you agree that these things should be or at least explored to see how much potential we can get out of contracting out, having somebody else build the ships, perhaps public partnerships, and again, which you have demonstrated, which is music to my ears, which is cooperation, international cooperation, to make sure that others are picking up a large portion, or at least a portion of the cost that will benefit everybody. But the last one, how about if there is going to be a harvesting of fish or a extraction of minerals or of oil and gas, would it be possible for us to have a user fee or a tax on those, specifically that wealth coming from there? Because after all, if it's dependent on our resources to keep that avenue open, that wouldn't be necessarily a tax. That would be a user fee for those businesses that are involved in Arctic enterprise. Is that a possibility?
Sir, we've been dealing with user fees in the past, and that's always required legislative authority. The Coast Guard does not have organic authority to impose user fees, for example, for search and rescue services and things like that, and we traditionally don't do that.
Right.
If Congress were to direct it by legislation, then I assume the Congress can speak.
Maybe there could be certain areas that are designated as high risk areas that will depend on government assets to achieve an end, and thus if you're going to be making a profit from that area, there is a payment that would be required for the government providing that service. Just a thought. I have 3 minutes to go and vote. I want to thank all of you for your testimony. I will read exactly what you said. I think this has been very beneficial to start this discussion. And again, a lot of things you've been saying have been music to my ears. Good luck to you all. This hearing is adjourned.